Tonight, two races that will shape law enforcement in Spokane County. Our first half hour features two Republicans vying for Spokane County Sheriff, incumbent Ozzie Knezovich and challenger Doug Orr. In our second debate, hear from two men seeking the open seat for Spokane County Prosecutor, Democrat Brian Beggs and Republican Larry Haskell, as KSPS presents this 2014 election special.
Welcome and thank you for joining us. I'm Christy Goranson, the moderator for tonight's debates. We begin with the race for Spokane County Sheriff, and because Washington is a top two primary state, both candidates in this race are Republicans. Let's meet them. Incumbent Ozzie Knezovich was appointed sheriff in the spring of 2006 and elected to the office of sheriff in the fall of 2006. Sheriff Knezovich is seeking his third term. Incumbent Doug Orr is a detective with the Spokane Police Department, where he's worked since 1996. Detective Orr previously worked for Idaho State Police. He holds a PhD in criminal justice from Washington State University. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Well, for this debate, the candidates will answer questions from a panel of Spokane journalists. From KREM 2 News, reporter Sean Chitness. From KXOY News 4, executive producer Melissa Luck. And from the Spokesman Review, government reporter Kip Hill. So before we begin, we want to go over a few of the debate rules for our viewers. All of these rules were agreed to by the candidates prior to the debate. The reporter panel will ask the same question to both candidates, or a panel member may direct a question to just one candidate. Reporter panel members may request a follow-up to an answer. Answers will be limited to 1 minute. Candidates will be allowed 2 rebuttals for the entire debate. Rebuttal length will be limited to 30 seconds. So let's begin. A coin flip determined that Sheriff Knezovich, you will have the opportunity to answer the first question first. And Sean, take it away.
Christy, thank you. Candidates, we want to begin by talking about school shootings and the recent one on the west side of the state last week. Talk to us about what you think the agency, the Spokane County Sheriff's Office, can do to be prepared for that type of incident, and how you can keep the community safe when it is concerned about something like that happening in our area.
School shootings are something that we've been looking at for a very long time. I was actually on the foundation team of the response for the Spokane County Sheriff's Office to school shootings. We actually teach a lot of the classes throughout the region on school shootings and how to respond to those shootings. So since 1994, I've been involved in this type of discussion because of my background in SWAT. One of the biggest things that we have to do is also train our schools, and Spokane County has been very effective in training our public schools in the things that they need to look at and how we go forward. The other aspect is to take a strong, hard look at our mental health system and try to identify kids that are having trouble before we have this type of incident happen.
All right, Detective Orr?
I don't think we can be fooled into thinking we're going to have an easy answer for this. In fact, we're not. Nobody saw this coming over on the west side of the state, a student being enrolled there. What is important is that we do have training involved. We do have training in place right now, but with both departments. And I think the core of it belongs to the crisis intervention training. What happens afterwards, how we respond to that. But most important right now, we have in place right now some labor negotiations with school resource officers, and for them to be better armed, better trained. Those labor negotiations have stalled, and it's important for us for everyone to partner with them to see that through and to get it in place now.
All right, second question, Melissa, and Detective Orr, you'll take this one first.
Candidates, 2 controversial gun rights initiatives on the ballot in Washington that both claim in their own way to make our state safer. 594 involves the expansion of background checks. 591 makes the state background checks line up with federal background checks. What are your stance on these initiatives, and do you think either of them would do anything to keep our community more safe?
591 is very straightforward. In fact, it more or less just reinforces our Second Amendment, that firearms are not going to be confiscated. With that, there shouldn't be any question that would be a yes for me. As far as 594, what it intends to do is to keep firearms from those who might hurt other people, and for those who couldn't get past a background check. In that way, you would say well, that's just great, but right now, that 18 pages, very ambiguous language, and it doesn't, those strategies do not reduce gun violence. And I think that's the most important thing here. $10 million has been spent on these campaigns. you know what I could do with $10 million? Crisis intervention training, where officers could interdict those guns, those weapons, the places where they matter the most. Domestic violence situations, situations with mental illness crisis. So that's where we need to focus.
Sure.
I support 591 because it does bring Washington in line with the federal standards, very clearly written legislation. I do not support 594 because it's 18 pages of very complicated language. It doesn't just say sell, it says transfer, and that word transfer is going to be a major problem in enforcing that law. You also have a lot of mandates, unfunded mandates that are being pushed down to the law enforcement agencies and small businesses. One of the things that we need to really address is when you take a look at trying to resolve these issues is who actually is applying for these weapons and how do we intervent them from getting those weapons. A simple background check of getting a concealed weapons permit would solve and close that loophole, because I am very much in favor in closing the loophole simply for the domestic violence side of this.
Thank you. All right, Kip.
Thanks, Christy. Budget session's coming up for the county. I'm going to ask both candidates to make a pitch. Do we need additional deputies, and where do we need them, and where's the money going to come from if we do need them?
And Sheriff Knezovich, you'll answer this one first.
Since 2008, the unincorporated areas of Spokane County have lost 34 deputies due to the national economy, actually worldwide economy. We have been struggling to try to recoup those positions through different measures of streamlining the agency, saving money where we could save money. There just isn't any money in the county's pipeline to do that. You know, there was in the paper, my opponent mentioned that he would ask for 5 deputies a year. Well, it takes 7 years to accomplish getting those 34 positions back. So in 2022, you would have the same amount of officers that you had in 2008. We have to have a really strong discussion with the Board of County Commissioners about where do we prioritize revenues, and if we can't find any revenues, are there revenues that we can come forward with and take to the citizens to pass?
Okay. Detective Orr?
If someone tells me that there isn't any money, then I'm going to create it. And let me explain to you what I mean by that. First of all, I'd be scared of anybody who thinks that they can answer that question in 60 seconds. It just can't be done. But to add some perspective, we spend 70% of our budget now on criminal justice. And at some point, the taxpayers are going to say, you know, we give you 70% of our money to do this and get this done, and you're not getting it done. So if we don't have money, we create it. So I'm going to focus my attention on creating revenue streams that aren't there. I'll give you a good example. The police department in California recently created their own records management system, wrote their own computer code for that. They now sell that code to other agencies and bring in more than $1 million a year. So I'm going to bring in some of that human capital and create some of those revenue streams.
All right, next question, Sean.
Candidates, let's talk about the reputation of the Sheriff's Office. As you know, there have been some stories about specific deputies having misconduct while on duty. What can be done to improve the reputation when you have cases like that? And also, do more steps need to be taken involving the legislature to give the sheriff more authority to deal with those deputies? Detective
Orr, you'll take this one first.
First of all, morale in the Sheriff's Office is fairly low right now, and apathy is fairly high. That needs to be solved immediately. When we talk about legislation, I know my opponent has promoted the integrity legislation. My opponent has gone to Olympia twice. It never makes it out of committee, and I can't see banging my head against the wall over something that's not going to work. So let's go ahead and bring it here to Spokane. Let's create some civilian oversight. And I'm not talking about just using the word transparency. I want to make a system, an ombudsman system, that is answerable. So, you know, when deputies lose their humility, we know they've done something selfish. They forget who they're working with and who they're working for. An ombudsman system will fix that and create that transparency that we need.
Sheriff Knezovich?
My opponent talks about the integrity legislation. There's only one reason that the integrity legislation hasn't passed, and that's because of the lobbies that form against it. He's endorsed by the lobbies that fought the implementation of the legislation that simply said you shouldn't commit crimes on duty, nor should you lie. And it left it up to the arbitrator to determine if we had proven our point. There have been roughly 54 people within the sheriff's office that did not wear their badge with honor and were removed from service. Only 4 of those were returned by arbitrators. And if you read the arbitration decision, it wasn't because of anything that we did in those investigations. It was very arbitrary decisions. We need to find a system and pass a law that if an arbitrator agrees with us, then they have to stay with our findings. An ombudsman, I'm working towards that right now. I've presented that to the Board of County Commissioners, but an ombudsman is not for internal investigations. It is for the outside to look inside.
But can
I have a rebuttal.
Okay, go ahead, 30 seconds.
It was interesting what my opponent just said there, that he sent 54 on off the job and he's only been overturned 4 times. That's a little deceiving. My opponent, I wish, would talk about how many times he's gone to grievance and then how many times he's been overturned. And that would show you the record that he has. This is about following the law. This is about following the law. It's about due process and giving everyone, no matter if they're Joe repeat offender or if they're a Silver Star deputy, giving them due process.
Did you have a follow-up question?
I was just going to say to both of you candidates, what about the reflection on the leader of that agency, and how would you deal with that? Doesn't that require you to do something more, regardless of getting other agencies or organizations involved?
Sheriff?
We have a very strong reputation within the community. If you talk to the citizens out there, they know that one thing, the Spokane County Sheriff's Office is held to very high standards. They have seen me hold my agency to very high standards, and that is one of the things that they compliment me the most on, is the fact that I do hold people accountable. I do follow the law. There's not been one time that my opponent can point to where an arbitrator has said, Sheriff, you didn't follow the law. Nor has civil service ever said that.
All right, next question, Melissa. And Sheriff, you'll answer this one first. Oh,
All right,
you would like to use your rebuttal?
No, I'll save it.
Okay.
You talked about endorsement, Sheriff, and I think that leads nicely into our next question. The Deputies Union has endorsed your opponent. I want to talk to you, Detective Orr, about what do you think that means moving forward? And to Sheriff Ozzie Knezovich, do you feel like in some ways maybe, have you lost the room? And maybe this legislation and the push for that has had something to do with that?
Sheriff?
I have not lost the support of the rank and file. The union leadership is different than the rank and file. The rank and file is very upset about how their union leadership handled that endorsement. As a matter of fact, they have asked a couple of times for a new vote on that. The thing that you have to look at is the unions statewide were very angry with me when I went to Olympia to do this. Matter of fact, our first meeting in Representative Kevin Parker's office, they stated, Sheriff, you've made us very angry. If you don't back down, we're coming after you. And that's what they did. They recruited my opponent. They came after me in an election. But again, they misjudged the citizens of this county. The citizens of this county stand behind me because I do hold people accountable. That was evidenced by a 72% primary win.
Trust is the currency of leadership. If you don't have it, you're not going to get anything done. I went to, and it's not fair to demonize unions. I'm not going to demonize the labor, the middle class worker. I listened to them. And when I went to talk to them about what we needed to go forward with, the fact that they would somehow want to lie or commit crimes on duty is ludicrous. I told them, when they asked me that question during the endorsement interview, they said, what are your thoughts on civilian oversight? Now, if there's anything that you're not going to get the union endorsement over, it's that. I told them, we're going to go forward with this. We're going to have it in my 4 years. I'm going to lead you through it. It's going to be something that we can all accept, and it's not going to distract us from the good job we're going to do. And they still endorsed me. And that's a powerful statement, and I'm proud to be endorsed by them.
All right, next question, Kip, and Detective Orr, you'll answer this one first.
Yes, another money question. Do we need a new jail, and how are we going to pay for it?
I'm going to fight that tooth and nail. We don't need a new jail. We have before us a blueprint on how to go about not having a new jail. The idea that we can change people's thinkings, and change their thinking, and I'm talking about what's rooted in that cognitive behavioral therapy where we're actually rehabilitating a person's way of thinking that they're not going to come back into the system. That's not for everybody. There are people out there that want to hurt us. They need an orange jumpsuit, they need a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and they need to sit in jail. We can't fix them. For the ones that are amenable to treatment, we have a plan for that. You keep them from coming back, you draw down the jail population. Let's put it to work, let's give it some time, and I think in the end, you'll find out we don't need a new jail.
Sheriff Knezovich?
My opponent is very naive on this subject. For the last 8 years, and actually the last 18 years, this community has fought with this issue. In 1995, the Spokane County Jail was identified as being overcrowded at 577 inmates. This week we had 660 inmates in a facility designed for 464. This has never been about a new jail. It's been about replacing Geiger Corrections, which is a very antiquated military barracks converted to be a jail, never intended to be a jail. My opponent doesn't recognize the fact that Commissioner Mark Richard and I brought smart justice to this community in 2007 when we hired David Bennett. We implemented many of those things that David Bennett brought to the table. Many of those ideas in the blueprint for reform are my ideas, things that we brought into this community. We have lowered the jail population roughly 25%. You're not going to get to a position where you can just magically wave a wand. And the reason we have repeat offenders in this community is because of the jail.
Sheriff, would you support a tax to pay for the jail?
You're going to have to take this to the citizens, and that's one of the things that my opponent is deathly afraid of. He doesn't want to lead. He wants to tried and true no new tax tagline. When you're a leader, you have to be willing to step up and say, folks, here's where we're at, here's what we need to go forward, and here's what it's going to take. And that's going to be taking it to them for them to decide. It's not us raising their taxes. The citizen will decide.
Detective Orr, would you like to answer the follow-up question as well?
Yeah, when we talk about money, I didn't lead us into a $300,000 lawsuit over legal financial obligations. I didn't lead us into a lawsuit over $79,000 worth of an illegal search a couple months ago. More than $500,000 to employees for claims against wrongful terminations, $230,000 to Prison News for a First Amendment violation. My opponent fired a victim of sexual harassment, and that cost you $500,000. You change leadership, I'll give you the money.
You may use your first rebuttal.
First rebuttal. Mr. Orr totally mischaracterizes what happened here, and if you take a look at the record, my administration has been sued vastly less than the prior administration. The reason being, we totally changed the policies and procedures that we work under. We have saved the money, and that lawsuit that he talks about, the $500,000, was a sexual harassment lawsuit that we ended up inheriting from the prior administration. They didn't do anything about it, and we had to deal with it. And it did cost money. And that's what happens when you allow something to go on for 9 years, then try to fix it.
All right. Next question, Sean. And Sheriff Knezovich, you'll answer this one first.
Well, Sheriff, you did just bring up the issue of repeat offenders and the relationship to jail, but what about the court system in general? Candidates, what can be done, especially in your position as sheriff, to keep some of these criminals from coming back out just days after they were initially booked?
One of the things that you have to take a look at is how did we end up with repeat offenders? And that's because we're not holding them accountable. We're not holding them in jail when they need to be held in jail. They get booked. Within 3 days, they're out on the street. And you ask any deputy or officer out there, they get told that by the criminal element all the time. They'll be out in 3 days. You have to have a situation where you have accountability. In order for smart justice to work, in order for the blueprint for reform to work, you have to have one key thing, and that is an empty jail bed. To hold people accountable when they violate their programming, when we try to steer them out of that criminal path, if they choose to go back to that path, there has to be swift and certain justice on that. That is one of the things my opponent just does not understand about smart justice in the jail. You have to have that empty jail bed. If you don't, you're going to end up with repeat offenders because we arrest them. We know who they are. We actually track our crime rates when they're in and out of jail. We need to be able to keep them in jail, and they need to be held accountable.
Let me take off my police hat and put on my academic hat here for just a second. Good policy is built on empirical foundation. In other words, research. Number two, it's built on good training. And number three, it has an accountability measure of some sort. My opponent says I don't understand policy or research, and that I'm afraid to go forward. We have a good blueprint ahead of us. It includes a screening tool for the judges. Right now, we have to have someone that can enact policy and implement it. That person is me, through the Vancouver Project for patrol officers, identifying those repeat offenders, excising them from the county, and then also the burglary profile that I'm going to bring. Increasing clearance rates, 400%, tripling the potential for arrest. Those scientific, well-founded ideas that we can bring here to Spokane County.
All right, Sheriff, your second and
My
final
second
rebuttal.
and final rebuttal. My opponent talks about this burglary aspect that he's going to bring to Spokane. The problem is it came from Daytona Beach. It was a PhD study. If you read that study, it clearly states that it is not vetted. It needs to be fully vetted. These arrest rates, correlation to 400%, haven't been vetted. And the chief of police said this, and here, this is a letter from him. Dr. Hunn's study and hypothesis are just a small component of his overall strategies. What he is trying to base his burglary aspect on is a 9-page PhD light study that was never vetted.
All right, Melissa, you have the next question.
I
And
have a rebuttal, please.
you may. Your second and final rebuttal.
That was co-authored. That study was co-authored by the chief of police of Daytona Beach, and it was co-authored by Dr. David Farrington, one of the top 3 criminologists in the world. Don't be afraid to bring that here. It's innovative. I'm going to make it work.
All right, and Detective Orr, you'll take this next question first. Melissa?
Those of us that live in Spokane County are lucky that most of us will never be the victim of violent crime. But property crime, it could be happening to us in the parking lot right now. There's been some recent high-profile cases where burglary rings busted up. But what would you do to increase this and make the people of Spokane feel like this is a priority? Because right now, whatever the numbers show, people in Spokane do not believe that this is a priority for either agency.
I've knocked on probably 10,000 doors during this campaign, and I'd say more than half of them that actually step out and talk to me each have their own property crime story. And we can talk about successes we've had in lowering the property crime rate here and there, but you talk to that person who gets victimized, property crime is up for them 100%. We do have partnerships available to us through COPS and through SCOPE. Some of those just need to be fine-tuned just a little bit, but those programs are there, and I'm going to expand those and probably consolidate them a little bit.
Sure.
My opponent talks about researched philosophies. We implemented one of the most researched philosophies in 2007, which is intelligence-led policing. That has aided us in identifying not only where and how crimes are being committed, but who's committing those crimes. We have this very robust, and that is why since 2007, we have reduced the violent crime rate in this county by 56%, lowest rate in 20 years. The property crimes rate is down 8% since 2004. We have targeted these issues, but it's not just because of intelligence-led policing as far as the policing aspect, it's the community-oriented part of intelligence-led policing. We have 550 SCOPE volunteers which we engage. We train them to go out and collect fingerprints, to look at email that our citizens send us saying where crime is. It's the citizen that is the greatest asset to us. We created a website where they could send it straight to us and we get their information.
All right, Sheriff Knezovich, you'll take this next question first. Kip?
Thanks, Christy. The lateral vascular neck restraint is a non-lethal method that deputies use to take down a subject who is presenting a risk to them. We know this. It's been used in several counties across the nation and has spawned some lawsuits. King County recently decided it was going to train deputies again to use this hold after a 10-year absence. It's used in Spokane County. Sheriff, do you think we need to take another look at this, and is it being used properly in the community?
With any training aspect and with any tool that you use, you always have to take a look at, are we applying this correctly? Are we training correctly? Those are all the questions that get asked every time that you have a use of force situation. We are currently researching the LVNR aspect. The state criminal justice has just re-implemented LVNR, the neck restraint, back into the curricula at the basic academy. They stand behind its safety. We are actually reading a study right now from Canada, because Canada has just given their blessing on the LVNR. So we always take a look at anything that has potential of life safety issues. But when you take a look at it, LVNR is being used throughout the state, and the country of Canada has just stated it's a very effective and safe tool.
When we talk about use of force, sometimes it's more about how it looks and how it sounds. If you use the word lateral neck restraint, people don't really know what you're talking about. You use the word chokehold and everyone knows what you're talking about. We train people in how to defend themselves, train officers how to defend themselves with nightsticks. Watching that on TV, an officer defend himself with a nightstick could be misinterpreted. The lateral neck restraint is a safe tool. Each tool, you'll find that when we use them, it'll increase officer injuries or it'll decrease officer injuries. It'll increase injuries to the suspect or decrease injuries to the suspect. More and better research, but the lateral neck restraint can be used safely by officers in the field.
All right, Detective Orr, you'll answer this next question first, and this is going to be our last question, so we'll limit your answer to 30 seconds. And Sean, this is yours.
Candidates, let's just talk about a couple things that Spokane Police has done. One, taking SWAT and rebranding it to Emergency Response Unit, and also using body cameras. Are those things you would like to see the Sheriff's Office do? Detective.
Yes, I believe already there's been a pilot program for the body cameras. That needs to be extended. We have to negotiate that with labor, of course, to have a full concept as it applies to civilian oversight so that we can use them in disciplinary measures. That has to happen right now. And again, creating that partnership with labor is very important. I don't demonize labor. I see them as an asset, not a liability. And that's where I'm going to start.
All right, Sheriff.
The answer is yes to both. You need body cameras, and we need to make sure that we are looking at all aspects of that particular system. We have done our trial. We are actually in negotiations with labor, and that started 2 years ago. We gave them just recently the new policy that we've come up with. We're waiting for them to come back. However, I truly believe that the cameras will reduce liability for this community.
All right, that will have to be the last question, so it's time now for closing statements. And before the debate, we flipped a coin, and Sheriff Knezovich, you will go first. You have 1 minute for closing statements.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been a pleasure to serve you as your sheriff for the last 8 years. We have done a lot of amazing things in that last 8 years. We have reduced violent crime by 56%, lowest violent crime rate in 20 years. Property crime rate is down. We have trained 18,000 law enforcement professionals from across the world because we are known as an international leader in training. My opponent talks about his endorsements all the time. Take a look at the website. You will see and compare the endorsements. I'm endorsed by law enforcement leaders from across the state. I'm endorsed by my own employees. There is a difference between the line troop and labor. My labor group has stated that I have too high of morals and that sex on duty is okay. I don't think that sex on duty is okay, and that is what's caused some of the rubs between me and labor, not me and the rank and file. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Sheriff Knezovich. Detective Orr, you have 1 minute for closing statements.
And thank you for having me here today, and thank you to Channel 7. I think the ground troops are saying the sheriff's standards are not high enough, that the law is the highest standard. The sheriff is the chief law enforcement officer of the county, and it is ironic to me that the people that he says he's leading are the people endorsing me. And I'm proud to be endorsed by the Spokane County Deputy Sheriff's Association, but I'm also proud to be endorsed by the detention services, that's the jail, their nurses. I'm also endorsed by the Spokane Police Guild. I'm also endorsed by the Spokane Police Lieutenants and Captains Association. I'm endorsed by the Spokane Firefighters. I'm endorsed by the Washington Association of Chiefs of Police and Sheriffs, or WACOPS. I'm also endorsed by the Washington Council of Metropolitan Police and Sheriffs. Law enforcement is endorsing Doug Orr for sheriff. Now you trust these people with your lives. Trust them with your vote, and vote for me on Election Day. Thank you.
Thank you to you both, and that will do it for this debate. Our thanks to the candidates, Ozzie Knezovich and Doug Orr, who are running for Spokane County Sheriff. Up next, candidates running for Spokane County Prosecutor. We'll be right back. The Spokane County Prosecutor's race has no incumbent, making this the first time in 16 years the county will have a new prosecutor. The candidates in the race are Democrat Brian Beggs, a private practice attorney specializing in civil rights cases. Mr. Beggs previously served as executive director at Spokane's Center for Justice. Next, Republican Larry Haskell, with 16 years' experience in the prosecutor's office trying criminal cases. Mr. Haskell is a deputy prosecutor where he currently serves in the gang unit. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, for this debate, the candidates have agreed to follow our debate rules. We'll put them up on the screen one more time so you can see them. The candidates will have 1 minute for answers. Each candidate can use up to 2 rebuttals during the debate. Rebuttal length will be limited to 30 seconds. For this debate, the candidates will answer questions from a panel of Spokane journalists. And joining us again are Sean Chitnis from KREM 2 News, Melissa Luck from KXLY News 4, and Kip Hill from the Spokesman Review. So let's begin. A coin flip determined that Mr. Haskell, you'll have the opportunity to answer the first question first. And Sean, you can take it away.
Christy, thank you. Candidates, we want to begin by talking about how you can engage the public, especially when there are some who may not understand the role of the prosecutor, and how you can help them to better understand the decisions you would make in that role.
Actually, that process has already begun. In terms of doorbelling and talking to the county residents, there's a lot of people I talk to that say, gee, you know, I don't really know what the county prosecutor does. Tell me what the county prosecutor does. So that process has already begun as I've been going around the county. But by way of being elected, I think the county prosecutor has an incredibly important role in communicating with the public, being responsive to the media, and educating the public not only about what the role of the county prosecutor is, but more than that, to talk about the decisions that we make and to talk about the reasons why we make them, the law that they're based on. So in order to do that, again, very responsive to the media, and also to meet with the various neighborhood leaders and go to the community centers in each of the areas, and to actually be more visible and more responsive that way. And also, I'd like a column in the newspaper as well.
All right, Mr. Beggs.
So the county prosecutor is the chief legal officer for the entire county. We handle the criminal side. We also handle the civil side. Just an article in today's paper about the clean water plant having some problems. I've been the go-to person for Spokane media for several years. When they've got a legal question, you can Google me and you can find out that TV, radio, and news reporters interview me when they have a question. And I provide answers and have for years. If I'm the elected prosecutor, I'll do the same. I'll have even a better platform to do it, because I'll be the chief spokesperson for the county prosecutor's office. And when people have concerns and questions, they'll come to me. I'll be at the office. I'll answer those questions. And we'll get out of front when there's some controversy. So at least the people know what is happening. And if we've made mistakes somehow in the county, we'll tell you how we're going to fix them.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Beggs, you'll take this next question first. Melissa?
The question to both of you is about courtroom experience and what you plan to do. Steve Tucker hasn't spent much time in front of a jury in at least the time that I've been here in Spokane. I'd like to know what you plan to do, what leadership style you would have as far as being the prosecutor and trying cases. And also for you, Mr. Beggs, the last time you were in front of a jury, most of us don't know that.
Sure. So I started out doing criminal law when I was a young lawyer back in the early 1990s, and I won a lot of criminal trials, and I've argued cases all the way to the state Supreme Court numerous times. As the prosecutor, I would not be doing trials day to day, because my job is to run an office of 65 attorneys and a lot more employees. And if I'm taking time off to do a case, although I'm sure I would do a good job at it, I'm taken away from leadership. But I will be in the courtroom watching other trials and our prosecutors and performance so that they know what's going on. My last jury trial was a year ago, and it had to do with a case of a police dog biting someone and taking off his ear. And the question was whether or not the police would be held liable for that or not. And the case is currently up at the Court of Appeals, and we're waiting for that decision. I've done tons of arbitrations, tons of mediations, tons of arguments, all different kinds. And I've been recognized as a great trial lawyer throughout the state. and I look forward to coaching and inspiring my officers to do the same.
All right. Mr. Haskell?
This is one area where my opponent and I have a bit of a disagreement in terms of what the role should be. I don't consider trying a case taking time off. The fact is that you can still manage an office of 135 people, including approximately 65 lawyers, and still try an occasional case, if you have the experience to try criminal cases, which I know that my opponent does not. So what I've told people before in other forums is I will try an occasional case. I'm not a headline grabber, but I think it's very important for, number one, the public to see the prosecuting attorney in the courtroom. In many of the smaller counties, it's not an event, if you will. It's part of what they do because their staff is so much smaller. But nonetheless, it's very important for the public to see you doing that, to know that you're competent enough to do that you're confident enough to do that. It's important for the judges to see you there, and it's very important that your deputies see you in there as well. So I will make sure that I take the time to do that in addition to all my management duties.
All right. And Mr. Beggs, you would like to use a rebuttal?
Yeah, I realize it was before my opponent went to law school, but I did a couple dozen criminal trials in my early years back in the 1990s, won most of them, and have argued cases all the way to the Supreme Court on criminal justice. I know how to win trials, and I've won millions of dollars for crime victims in the civil arena in addition to doing criminal trials. And so the question is, where do you want your leadership? Do you want them coaching and inspiring great trial lawyers that you already have, or do you want them off in a courtroom? I will, if it's at the Supreme Court, I will go there because I'm a great appellate lawyer and I'll win that case for the county.
All right. Let's see. Mr. Haskell, you will take this question, the next question first. And Kip?
Thanks, Christy. As a crime reporter, I continue to see affidavits and investigations around marijuana and production of marijuana. Can you explain to the public, what the law is in terms of what is actually a felony if you have any marijuana or producing marijuana, and what would you look for in an investigation that comes to you that has elements of marijuana in it?
Well, the marijuana laws, basically, as I view it right now, in approximately 3 stages. You have the illegally obtained marijuana, which if it's more than 40 grams, it's a felony. You have the newer law that passed a year or so ago that allows marijuana, if you're over 21, purchased from a licensed dealer and you smoke it where you're supposed to smoke it in your home or in the curtilage area. And then, of course, we still have the medical marijuana law on the book as well. And if you have a certificate, a license, then you're legal to have marijuana in that manner. So the prosecuting attorney will enforce the law. I will enforce the law as it currently is. If it's obtained illegally, I will prosecute. If it's smoked illegally, I will prosecute. And if you're driving under the influence of marijuana, I will prosecute that as well. But beyond that, those are the 3 stages, if you will, areas of the law that affect marijuana use in our state currently.
All right, Mr. Beggs?
So I would have 3 priorities in terms of marijuana prosecution. The first is anyone that's supplying it to minors. We know how dangerous that is. Their brains are not fully developed. And with this new legalization in Washington, that really is the big fear. Is it just going to open the floodgates? So people who sell to minors, that would be my top priority. My second top priority would be driving impaired. When people are driving impaired, they are putting all of us at great risk. And so we need to make sure that that's controlled. And the third is if there is an enterprise of people that are really selling illegal marijuana on a large scale in our community and trying to upset this entire system that we are experimenting with. The system doesn't work as far as legally buying it and distributing it and collecting the taxes that we can then use to help with drug addiction if there's a whole black market out there. And so it's going to be interesting that people are really going to support prosecution for drug dealers because it undercuts our whole system that we're experimenting with.
All right, Mr. Beggs, you'll answer this next question first. Sean?
Candidates, we want to talk about some cases that have been in the news recently. The one I'm going to bring up is Preston Marr, who was a teenager facing a vehicular homicide case. And as you know, he was given a sentence of weeks in detention for that as the driver of that car where 2 young teens were killed. Many people in the public were confused by that decision and by the plea that was made. Do you support that, and how would you go about explaining that to the public?
I was not an attorney on the case, and I didn't get into all the details of it, so I'm going to give some deference to the judge and the attorneys that were on it. But I think the reason why it's so disturbing is that he only got a few weeks for the loss of some lives, and there are other crimes where people spend far more time, and that's not there. And sometimes in the criminal justice system, there's a crime that is so disturbing to the general public that we want an example set. And I think that's probably a case where we could have done that, where we could have said, yes, you're a good person and you're reformable and that's good, but we need to set an example for all the youth that are out driving out there and that might be tempted to take a flyer, so to speak, and underestimate what the consequences are. I can't second guess exactly what happened, but I share that concern. And the one thing that was most disturbing is that when the elected prosecutor was asked about it, he knew more about the defendant's life and didn't know the victim's first name. That would have to change in my office.
All right, Mr. Haskell.
Well, I would certainly agree that the prosecuting attorney should know more about the case, and if I'm elected the county prosecutor, particularly when I'm addressing family members, I'll know everything possible about the case, and I would also make sure that I had the actual prosecutor that was prosecuting the case in the room with me to make sure that we didn't miss anything. In this particular case, I wasn't involved in it at all, but I will tell you this, as shocking as it may seem, for a felony, a first felony, the judges have the option of imposing what they call the first offender option. And the first offender option gives a criminal defendant 0 to 90 days in jail. And it was clear that this is what was worked out, and that's what the judge imposed. I was also informed that Mr. Beggs was the retained civil attorney for the victim in this case, and that he actually recommended 0 time. But nonetheless, what was given was within the law. It isn't what I would have pushed for, but it was what the parties agreed to. The judge had the authority to go outside of that, but chose not to.
All right, let's move on to the next question.
Talking about another specific case that's been in the news, but was a little bit more within the prosecutor's office. The case of Mariah Wright, a deputy prosecutor who was accused of misconduct because of her involvement with a known criminal who literally had criminal tattooed on his forehead. Part of the frustration there for the media and the community that we serve as well is that the prosecutor's office never made a statement, never came forward to defend or to condemn their attorney. How would you do that differently if you were the elected prosecutor?
Mr. Haskell, you will answer this one first.
In this particular case, there were some unique circumstances because of the fact that the case went federal pretty early. The FBI got involved in it, and basically my understanding is that they told the office to, the FBI has it, to not make any extra judicial statements on the matter. That aside, if the FBI tells the office what to do in terms of that, I'm probably going to follow that as the elected. There's a lot of not only investigative reasons for doing that, but there's also, remember, everybody's entitled to due process, everybody has constitutional rights and that sort of thing. And by rule 3.6 and 3.8 in the rules of professional conduct, we're not to make, as prosecutors, any extrajudicial statements that could prejudice either the potential jury pool or the matter in any way, and also not to condemn somebody before they should be. Now, as far as what I would have done in this case, absent an FBI, is I would have gone forward and told what I could, but no more than the rules and due process allow.
Mr. Beggs.
So, the elected prosecutor were accountable to the voters of Spokane, and they deserve to know more about what was going on earlier and what was being done to make sure it didn't happen again. I would, of course, work with the FBI, but this prosecutor's office could have announced to the public, because it was a public record, that the deputy prosecutor was on administrative leave, that the FBI was investigating, and that at some point they did a procedure which I recommended, which is bring in the Attorney General's office to investigate so there's no conflict of interest. The public wants to hear about it first from the office, so it doesn't look like a cover-up or someone's trying to hide the ball. In this case, what we really want to know is how did this ever happen, and what are we going to do to make sure it doesn't happen again? And I just want to go back to the last question to say that I have had no dealings with the victims in that car crash case, so I'm not sure where that's coming from.
All right. Thank you to you both. So, Mr. Beggs, you'll answer this next question, and it's Kip's question.
Thanks, Christy. I'm going to ask about the Gail Gerlach case. There was a decision to charge Mr. Gerlach, who fired a weapon outside his home and struck a man who was apparently trying to steal his vehicle, with manslaughter. That case went to trial. The jury decided that Mr. Gerlach acted in self-defense, and now state taxpayers are paying, close to $200,000 on this. Do you agree with the decision to charge Mr. Gerlach with manslaughter, and would you have handled that situation any differently?
The challenge in the Gerlach case is there was the initial investigation that we heard about, that the car was going well down the road, there was not a danger, and that shots were taken then. Under those facts, there should have been a charge, and I agree with the charge. The challenge was by the time we got to trial on it, the police had not really nailed down the defendants to the statement clearly. And so they simply said, no, that didn't happen. He was right by us, it was a threat to us, and that's what they argued to the jury. And so if there's anything that I would have changed in that, it was nail it down earlier so we have those statements of the defendants, since they were willing, nailed down and documented so they couldn't change it. But the charge on the initial set of facts, that was appropriate.
All right, Mr. Haskell.
I would agree. The process that we go through when we get a completed investigation is to look at the law and what you have to prove at trial, and then determine whether or not, given a reasonable defense that could be raised, whether or not a fact finder could find guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. In this particular case, I am aware of the fact that there were some statements that were made by the defendant, Mr. Gerlach, that were suppressed by the court. That is not something necessarily that can be foreseen, because there's going to be briefing on it, there's going to be argument, and ultimately a judicial officer will make that decision. So in this case, there were some statements that might otherwise have influenced the jury another direction, but I do believe that if a set of facts, when investigated, meets the statutory requirements, and you can, again, survive the most reasonably foreseeable defense, that you allow the public to decide rather than one person.
In this particular case, the prosecuting attorney did step out and, when Mr. Gerlach was charged, make some statements. Do you think that was appropriate at that time to make those statements about why the charges were filed and what they were trying to accomplish?
Again, consistent with the rules of professional conduct, you can state what's in a public record, you can state that an investigation is ongoing, you can say that a prosecution has been instituted, but beyond that, getting into the facts, if they haven't been established, I believe the rules of professional conduct would prohibit that.
Go ahead, Mr. Bates.
I would just say it's really important for the prosecutor to explain the law to the public of what's going on. Because some people felt like, hey, if my life isn't threatened, of course I can use a gun. But what the prosecutor was explaining is that under the facts as he understood them, the car was gone. And now we have the danger to children walking in the neighborhood, and if people are simply firing guns because they're angry about their property and not to defend their lives, that's against the law in Washington. So it is important for the prosecutor to explain that, because I don't think much of the public really understood those issues. And then the confusion of which set of facts made it even harder for people.
Right. You would like to use your 30-second rebuttal?
One, yes.
Okay.
And that's exactly what I've promised to do if I'm elected county prosecutor. One of the most critical roles is to get out in front of things and explain, again, everything that we can, that an investigation is going on, what the facts are that are allowable within the rules. And again, make your decision, make it public, own it, and take responsibility for it. That's what I'll do.
All right, Sean, you'll take the next question, and Mr. Haskell, you'll answer this one first.
So now let's talk about officer-involved shootings and declaring whether they are justified or not. As you know, some members of the Spokane City Council have expressed their frustration on how that process works and the fact that it isn't timely enough. And we've also seen in other counties across the state that process goes through in a fraction of the time than it does here in Spokane County. So what do you think of that process, and what can you do, if anything, to make that faster?
Well, clearly, one of the reasons that some of the decisions have been made a little less timely is we've had a spate of officer-involved shootings lately. And I believe that the number one thing that the prosecutor owes the public, that's the public at large, the family of the deceased, as well as the officer or officers involved, is an accurate decision. I will not, as county prosecutor, sacrifice accuracy for speed. However, clearly, we can do better than we've been doing, and I intend as prosecutor to sit on those boards myself and to have my chief criminal and also my major crime supervisor as the three decision makers as to whether or not an officer-involved shooting was justified or it was not. We will make that a priority until that's done, because we do owe the public that as timely as accuracy allows. Now, in terms of whether or not the officer-involved shootings are justified, there is a standard that has to be met. Remember that process of going through the statutory basis, and I'll get to that later.
All right, Mr. Beggs.
So I have looked at a lot of the officer-involved shootings and the investigations, and the actual investigations by law enforcement happen fairly quickly. I mean, they are thorough, they want to do a good job and make sure they get it right, but they happen. The delay has been at the prosecutor's office looking at those investigations and then making a decision one way or the other. I would propose three things. The first thing is, I will have a deputy prosecutor that is an expert on officer-involved shootings and what is legal and what is illegal, so that we have someone that's up to date on the law on that. I'm very knowledgeable as well, so I'll be able to assist. But I want a go-to person so that it gets done timely. Secondly, if it is a clear violation of the law, we of course will prosecute. If it's clearly not, we'll get rid of it as soon as we can so that the officer can get back to work. If it's a gray area, though, which a lot of these are, we're going to refer it to the Attorney General's office that has a unit to do these. And then there'll be no question of bias. And finally, I'm a big supporter of coroner inquest juries, where we get that to the public and they get to see the evidence and they can make their own decision along with the prosecutors about whether there's criminal or not. They at least know what happened.
All right, your second and final rebuttal.
Second rebuttal. Thank you. As far as the Attorney General goes, I called the Attorney General and I asked them, okay, exactly what kind of staffing do you have for this sort of thing? They got 4.5 people at any one time. Several of them are under contract, essentially, paid for, those positions are paid for by other state agencies. There's about a person and a half at the Attorney General's office right now on any given day to look at these sorts of situations. They just don't have the staffing. What they expect you to do is, if you can't make the call yourself, hire a special deputy or go ahead and conflict it out to another county.
All right. Yes.
Use my second
Sure.
rebuttal.
You may. 30 seconds.
So that's so interesting because in the Mariah Wright case that we were just talking about, they are using the AG's staff person for exactly that same reason. Up in Colville, there was an officer who was sexually assaulting drunk driving perpetrators, and they used that special process. I'm not talking about we're using it always, but I'm talking about we will use it earlier so that we get these decisions. Because everybody wants to know. The public wants to know what happened. The officer wants to get back on the job if he or she is exonerated. And the families also want to know. We can do better on that, way better than we have been. And when I'm elected, we will.
All right. Melissa, you have the next question. And Mr. Beggs, you'll answer this one first.
Part of this comes from what Christy mentioned before. The first time we've had a new prosecutor in this county in 16 years, no matter which of you wins the election next week. A lot of money has been put into this race and a lot of scrutiny. Why do you think that is? And how do you think people can sort of get through all of the outside noise to get to who they should decide to vote for?
Well, I think they're going to focus on what people's qualifications are. And again, the office is an elected manager position. You have to run the whole office. So you have to be someone who's got experience creating change, supervising people, managing budgets, negotiating with other government leaders, and a long experience as a lawyer. That's what I believe the voters are going to look at. And we both have websites and Facebook pages, and people can make that. The reason it's an important case right now is that Spokane is on the cusp of a big change. For a while, we had a $200 million jail. Are we going to spend our money on that? And then we were able to convince people that no, let's just spend our money more wisely. Let's manage our jail beds more wisely. Let's get people off the merry-go-round of jail, reoffense, jail, reoffense. And so people get that, and it's not a left or a right, or it's not a law enforcement or a non-law enforcement. Everybody wants that to happen because they know how much money we'll save and how much of a better community. And so that's why this really is the premier race in this election this time, and people are paying attention.
Mr. Haskell?
Thank you. Melissa, you raise a good point about the money. I think it's very important for the voters to take a look at the PDC records for both of us because my opponent raises a considerable amount of the total percentage of his money from out of state and out of county. And take a look at my PDC and see who's supporting me financially. It is important that the elected prosecutor have the qualifications that you're looking for. And I do have over 13 years of criminal prosecution experience. My opponent has no criminal prosecution experience. It is a management position, and I haven't been a manager in the office. But what I have done is I've gone away for active duty for 3 years, and I've been with the Assistant United States Attorney's Office. So it's important to understand that as a lieutenant colonel retired in the United States Air Force, I've had extensive military and leadership experience, and I've also led people not only in the air, in flying airplanes, but also in a combat arena in Saudi Arabia when we were over there for Iraqi freedom. I'm prior elected, and I have lots of budget and other issues experience.
All right, this is going to be our last question, so we'll ask you to limit your answers to 30 seconds. Mr. Haskell, you'll answer this one first, and Kip, you have the last question.
Yeah. Washington voters are going to decide on a pair of gun initiatives, Initiative 591 and Initiative 594. Initiative 594 has to do with expanded background checks for things like online sales and gun show sales, and 591 requires that the state doesn't pass any laws that would supersede federal background checks. What is your opinion on these initiatives, and what impact would they have on the prosecutor's office?
We recently addressed this issue in another forum. 591 really is duplicative of laws that we have to protect us already. So I believe that there's no sense in putting a law in the book that's duplicative of rights and responsibilities in terms of the government already. 594, the concern for me as a prosecuting attorney is the transfer issue. It's not the registration of the sales and that sort of thing. It's not the background checks, but it's policing the transfers. I think it's almost impossible to do. It's going to be difficult to prosecute those cases, and though I will do them if it becomes the law, it's a very difficult situation.
All right, Mr. Beggs?
Yeah, I've been recognized by my peers locally and around the state as one of the top lawyers who does constitutional law. And I'm a big believer in the Bill of Rights. And every year I do at least one case that defends one of the Bill of Rights. And the Second Amendment is right up there. But what it does not protect is giving guns to a felon or someone who's been declared mentally ill. And we know that background checks as they exist prevent those sales every day. And 594 will do a better job of that. To the degree that it impacts on the Second Amendment, I'm going to only enforce it up to the limits of the Second Amendment, because the Supremacy Clause of the Constitution says that is the law of the land.
All right, thank you to you both. It's time for closing statements. And Mr. Haskell, we did the coin flip, and you will go first. You have 1 minute for closing statements.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much for having us here today. Thank you for everybody that's tuning in. If I'm elected your county prosecutor, and I'm asking you to do so, I will bring a strong commitment to criminal justice reform, seasoned by my 13 years as a criminal prosecuting attorney. I am not an idealist, but rather a pragmatist. I will protect the safety of the public. I will hold offenders accountable. I will and have been tough on crime. I will make sure that victims are compensated, and I will push for the reforms that are listed in the blueprint for reform, but only the ones that are proven to work, only the science-based ones, the ones that have been rigorously tested and continuously evaluated. And I will only offer those to offenders who seem likely to succeed in those. You can't make somebody take treatment that they don't want, and after a while you're using more resources on someone who won't than those who need it. Thank you for your vote.
All right, Mr. Beggs, 1 minute.
I'm running for Spokane prosecutor to reduce crime and save taxpayer money. We're currently spending over 70% of our budget on criminal justice, and we don't feel safe. We're drowning in property crime. The jail's overflowing. It's time for new leadership to solve some old problems. For 23 years as a lawyer, I've been holding wrongdoers accountable by winning jury trials, arguing to the Supreme Court, and negotiating reforms with the city and the county. I've helped create justice for victims of domestic violence, drunk driving, sexual assault, and the families whose loved ones have been killed, like the Otto Zem family. And with all due respect to my opponent and his service to our country, I have more experience practicing law, managing attorneys, and creating the smart justice reforms that will help us get to a safer community. Vote for Brian Beggs for Spokane County Prosecutor and be part of the solution. Thank you.
All right, thank you, gentlemen. And that'll do it for tonight's debate coverage. Our thanks to candidates Brian Beggs and Larry Haskell for taking part. And I also want to thank our panel of journalists, Sean Chitness, Melissa Luck, and Kip Hill. Thanks for watching, everyone. Don't forget to vote.